Let's face it, there's really only one piece of this series that really truly matters. She's Sherlock, she wears the damn hat. Honestly, come what may, I could probably show up in a little yellow frock, but with the hat, and you'd probably still get the message. So before I proceed with the other components in this Lady Sherlock series, I'm first going to take a moment to focus on the seemingly quick and simple task of making up a sensible little Deerstalker hat. Once again, I should like to announce that this project is most kindly sponsored by the folks over at June's Journey, the hidden objects mystery game set in 1920s New York City. If you missed out on it last time, I shall put a new link to that in the description box down below. It is free to download and to play. But basically, it is this lovely little mobile game that has kept me wonderfully occupied during commutes, and during waits, and general times I have needed to shut up my brain in the past couple of months. I love it because it is, of course, a puzzle game, which are well and truly the sort that capture my attention, but it also has a riveting murder mystery storyline following our main character, June, who is a Lady Sherlock in and of herself, albeit with a different sort of funny hat, who is on the hunt to figure out who killed her sister. I won't give any spoilers, but I will say that it has been the most wonderfully pleasant and relaxing and immersive way to spend those more mundane points of the day when you really just need a bit of mental stimulation and some pretty colorful artwork to look at. So I most definitely recommend having a little peek into June's story if that is something that interests you. But speaking of mental stimulation, or mental torment more like, I believe we have a little bit of pattern drafting to do. So for lack of an actual historical pattern available, I'm going to try drafting my own. The hat will be made up of 6 sort of orange segmenty pieces, so to create this shape I've just drawn a baseline at 1/6 of an inch the circumference of my head, which by the way is taken like this around the hairstyle that I'll be wearing under the hat, and straight across so that the measuring tape is parallel with the floor. Then at the center point, I'm marking a line 6 inches up to form the height of the crown, and then playing around with the shape of the curve. I sort of have no idea what I'm doing here, and I'm really just guessing, but I think I want the width to start tapering around the middle of the length. Once I'm thoroughly satisfied with the shape on one side, I'm just cutting it out on a fold because symmetry and stuff. Now to make a really quick mock-up just to test my questionable geometry skills. You may recognize this shape. It is definitely a sacrificed scrap of the combinations mock-up. You continue to serve me well, dear friend. Oh hey, I pressed them so they look a bit less like garbage. The pieces are pinned together, obviously, then stitched, then pinned some more, then stitched some more, until I have the basic essence of a hat thing. So when I put it on, it was definitely a bit too big. Too deep, probably, but also there was just too much width in the crown and it wasn't wanting to sit in a smooth dome shape. So I thought it might be prudent to fit it by pinning out the excess, which I was doing on myself in the viewfinder of the camera, so needless to say this was a wholly fruitless endeavor. Time for plan B. Okay, so here's where we are in Deerstalker land presently. This was the first mock-up that I made here. Well, I put a couple of pins in it as I was doing this little weird fitting thing just to try and take out some of this excess at the top. I'm not sure if you can quite fully understand. Basically, there's just a little bit too much width around this top area here, and as you can see, it's just wanting to sort of buckle in like this and not sit out like a dome. So I panicked a little bit because just taking out little bits here where I thought would be necessary is not the way to solve this problem, because all of these pieces are the same shape and it's just supposed to be 6 of the same shape making a full circle. Just taking out arbitrary bit would not make it a, symmetrical, geometrically whatever correct piece. And of course trying to figure out how much width I was taking out and then where to subtract it from what points on the curve of this shape. It's honestly something beyond my comprehension. So I decided to just take this shape or something vaguely of this shape, cut that from this. I made a new mock-up. It did the same thing. But then what I discovered is that when I removed one of these sections here, it sits perfectly fine. The downside to that is then the base of it is too small. Like this won't fit my head. Essentially, I need the width down here, but something in the width up here is just not sitting correctly in a smooth dome shape. There's a lot of geometry in this that I did not anticipate, and I have absolutely no mental capacity of how to solve this. What am I going to do? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a hold on these mock-ups. The potential thing that I could do is I could split these seams, and I may actually experiment with this. I'll just split these seams about up to here, put this on my head, and do like what I did in the corset video with the gores and just insert how much I need to add to the base of this and then sort of just calculate that onto this, because that's a bit more easy on the brain than trying to deal with this whole three-dimensional shape. So that's something I might do. I am a little bit worried about the fact that I've just cut out one of these pieces altogether. I don't know if it's tradition that deerstalkers have 6 segments or if it's acceptable for them to have 5. I'm just not sure. I think before I attempt this will be my emergency fix solution. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and find a reference or an image or an illustration, or maybe, hopefully, if I'm very, very lucky, some sort of pattern in a magazine or in a book, in a guide or something from the period, and just see if I can get a real shape from somewhere and what their shape did to actually make it a real usable, workable thing. Obviously, it's not something that's going to be immediately available, because that's where I start with my research, is looking for the primary sources, and that's not something that came up in my searches when I was first doing the research for this, hence why I decided to draft my own pattern. So more research is definitely needed. I shall be back. As our dear friend Mr. Holmes says, the game is afoot. Okay, so I had a little bit of an epiphany last night, and I thought perhaps I was having such confusion with this because the muslin is very limp and it's very unstructured, and perhaps all of this warping issue was to do with the fact that the fabric just doesn't have any body to it, and the actual hat will have some sort of stiffener lining to it. So what I did really quick this morning is I just mocked up 2 additional little deerstalker experiments. This one's of tarlatan, which is a stiffened, loosely woven cotton. It is a historically accurate material. This one is out of Buckram, which is also historically accurate. It's a linen that's been stiffened with a heavy glue. So this one's really stiff, this one's marginally stiff. It sort of feels like a medium to heavy weight interfacing this, which has a lot more structure than the muslin. As you can see, the problem did not go away with the additional structure to the hat piece. It's still doing, although you can see it a bit better now. You can see that it's sort of wanting to buckle a bit, and it's not wanting to sit as a nice, smooth, clean dome. However, I don't consider this a huge loss or waste of time, because now I feel like I can use the structure of these forms to pin out roughly where the excess is, to then hopefully gain a sense of what the actual shape of these segments should be to create a nice, smooth dome. This is something that I obviously could not do on the muslin because it's just too limp, and doing it on my head proved very unsuccessful. So I'm feeling a bit better about these. I think I'm going to try and work with the tarlatan only because I think the buckram is a little bit too stiff, and I don't think I will be using this on the actual hat. So I'm going to try and work with the tarlatan form here, just pin out some little bits of this excess here, see how that translates onto the pattern piece. I will try and make some alterations on that, and probably make another tarlatan mock-up, which, if it works, I will just go ahead and use that as the interlining for the actual hat. No, I won't, because interlining does not get stitched together before it goes in. It has to be flat-lined to the actual pieces. So anyway, I will probably take that apart and then properly interline my pieces. But anyway, let's just do some stuff. So I'm just pinching out the excess, then marking on the underside how much I should try and cut off. This is then transferred to my pattern, then cut away to achieve that new and hopefully more successful shape. Okay, so mock-up number 5 is complete. It kind of did the same thing. I don't understand why. My brain doesn't geometry, apparently. So what I did is I just went through and I just manually did what I probably should have done in the first place and just sort of pinched out all of the excess in the seams. It's much better now. It works now. I haven't decided whether I will mark the edges of these and then use these as individual pattern pieces to cut out the top fabric. I don't think I will, just because I can foresee, based on how this project is going thus far, that even if I were to try and stitch these new lines together, something strange would happen again. I don't trust my ability to do that. So I think what I may do is I may unpick this, I may cut out 6 of these in the fabric and the lining, and then just understand that I will have to go through this process again. I will interline these tarlatan pieces with the actual tweed, then stitch them all together, and then do this process again. So you shall get to see that if you are also having the same problem, making your own Sherlock Holmes style deerstalker hat. And then, in order to get the seams to stay as they should, I may go in and top stitch this by hand. I don't have any historical evidence necessarily to support. Visible top stitching is not a historical inaccuracy in general. It may give the hat some nice extra bit of texture. I haven't necessarily seen evidence of a deerstalker with top stitching down the seams, but you know what? It'll give it some individuality and will just give me some peace of mind. And also because what is a project of mine without a little bit of excess hand stitching? Am I right? Alright, so I'm going to unpick this. I'm going to reuse these pieces because they are here. I have them. They're usable. reusable, and then I shall go ahead and cut out the real hat. After cutting out 6 new segments from the wool tartan and unpicking my tarlatan mock-up, whoa, that is going to get confusing real fast, I'm then pinning the 2 layers together. And because pins make flat surfaces not very flat, I'm then quickly pad stitching these layers together to hold them firmly in place so that they don't slide around whilst stitching. Then the pieces are pinned together in 3 pairs and are ready to be stitched. Once again, if you are not familiar with my method, I like to try and work with techniques as close to those that may have been used historically in my reconstruction work, which means getting to use my 1891 hand-turned Singer machine to do the stitch work on this and other 1890s Lady Sherlock pieces. Once the pairs have been stitched together individually, I can then begin to connect them into a continuous dome shape. Since all that thick wool layering at the top was a bit too much to go under the presser foot of the machine, I've resolved to finish up the top bits on the 3 seams that weren't part of the original 3 pairs with a firm back stitch done by hand. Regardless of machine ability, I think this is actually a good idea since it can get a bit tricky trying to maneuver all of those peaks into place neatly, and sorting it out all by hand is a lot less stressful, although maybe that's just me. And now that all the layers are firmly secured together, I can remove my basting stitches. Since I don't actually have to cut these out, and these are perfectly long bits of thread, I'm going to hang on to these and reuse them later. I'm then just giving the lower parts of these seams a good press, but not really bothering with the domed bits, since I'm about to start doing some pinning witchcraft and will be repositioning those seams anyway. And about that pinning witchcraft, that is precisely what I did next. Just sort of gently guiding the hat to where it wants to sit relatively smoothly and pinning it into place. The top stitching I'm just doing with a little back stitch, and it proves to be much less noticeable than I expected, but still does the very important job of making it seem as if I haven't completely cheated all of my seams, but it's fine. Okay, so I'm going to start cutting the lining for this Deerstalker hat. I have yet to finish the actual top stitching on this, but I have to be elsewhere this afternoon, and so I thought I will save some of this hand stitching to do whilst I do that. And meanwhile, while I'm home, I will start cutting out the lining. So I've got 2 lining options. Both of these were sent to me by Noelle, who is doing Lady Watson. She came up with this clever idea that we should perhaps trade fabrics to put on one another's hat pieces, just so that we have a little piece of one another on our costumes. So she sent me 2 silks that she's using on Lady Watson. This, I believe, is the skirt. I don't know what this is. And I thought I would use them for the lining of the Deerstalker hat. She's got a sweet little note on this too. This should probably come off. So I'm trying to decide which color I should use for the lining of the Deerstalker. Personally, my preference would be to line it with the brown, I think. I have come across some research. I don't know the complete validity or widespreadness of this rule, but Bertha Banner, in a little section on pockets that I was referencing for the skirt video, which is still to come, she makes a note that linings should typically be made of lighter fabrics because darker ones have the potential to bleed onto the actual material. That, of course, is not a problem for us because our modern fabrics tend to be dye fast. And again, I'm not quite sure how widespread or how universal this rule was, or if it's just something that she's saying is good practice but is not necessarily something that people actually followed. I'm sure there are plenty of dark linings and things in 19th century clothing, so that's not something I feel hugely compelled to stick strictly to. Although I'm not wholly offended by this ivory, it's quite nice. I know the waistcoat is sort of this color-ish, so that might be nice to sort of match it to. Well, I was planning to line the waistcoat with some brown silesia. Isn't there silk on waistcoats, like silk linings, or a silk back maybe, I don't know, on waistcoats? I haven't thoroughly done the research for that yet because I'm not quite at that stage of this process. Maybe it would be prudent to save the brown just in case I need this for something on the waistcoat and use this for the hat. Not like I need terribly much because it's literally just this, but yeah. Yeah, we'll go with the ivory. You win, Bertha Banner, you win this time. Once again, the lining segments are cut out and pinned together in pairs, then stitched together just as I did the main hat. And once the lining layer is together and the top stitching mostly complete, I'm going to go ahead and draft my brim and ear flap pieces. To get the shape of the brim, I'm just tracing around the outer edge of my cap so far. Each front and back brim piece will take up 2 segment lengths, with the ear flaps occupying the middle 2 spaces. So I'm just drafting the shape to go across these front 2. I'm having it come out to 1.5 inches at center front, a sort of arbitrary measurement, but one that I think will look nice enough. I'm then just rounding off my curves on half of the shape and cutting this out with the paper folded to ensure that the curves on both sides are perfectly symmetrical. Then to draft the ear flaps, again I'm starting with the width of one of the cap segments, then measuring up to about 1/2 inch from the very peak of the crown to find the length. Once again, I'm only drafting half so that I can cut it on the fold. I'm then cutting out 4 of each piece on the fabric, a front and back, top and bottom for both ear flaps, and 2 brims. I'm then cutting out 2 stiffener pieces for the brims out of Buckram, and 2 lighter stiffening layers for the ear flaps out of the Tartan. These pieces are all cut net, that is with no seam allowance, since they'll be stitched between both layers of fabric, and adding these stiff materials between the seam allowances will make them bulky to turn. Not so much a problem for the Tartan, but certainly for the Buckram. I'm then just pinning the stiffening layers to the fabric pieces and basting them into place, so that I can go ahead and pin the unstiffened side with the right sides together. When it comes to the ear flaps, I'm also sandwiching a little 12-inch length of ribbon at the center point of the end curve, so that I'll have nice little ties coming out the ends. These are rather straightforwardly stitched all around the edges, not actually catching the stiffening layers. With that done, I'm just clipping down the seam allowances to about 1/4 inch, then clipping the curves so that they turn more easily. Okay, so it was my intention to go through and now do just a tiny little bit of top stitching, just about 1/4 inch, just where the seam allowance ends. And I really liked the look of that. It helped to keep everything nice and stable, and I plan to do that on this. I definitely want to do that on these ear flap pieces because I feel like it will just help to keep everything in place. If you notice, these interfacing buckram pieces are just cut net, so when I did the stitching around, they're not actually connected in any way, so the top stitching will just help to keep those in position. However, I kind of really like the sort of cleanness of the brim pieces. I don't really think I want aesthetically to be doing top stitching on these, which does mean that this buckram piece will be completely free once I remove this basting. However, it is my hope and wish and dream that once this is connected to the base of the hat, that it won't really matter, that it will just be held nice and firmly in place. But I might as well just go ahead with the top stitching on these ear flaps. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go ahead and attach these to the cap just as they are without any top stitching, and go ahead and do just a little bit of top stitching around on these pieces before attaching them. That done, it's time to make this hat a thing. The brims and ear flaps are pinned on, lining them up at their respective segments, then the hat is stitched all around that bottom edge to secure everything into place. And now that everything is attached where it should be, I can go ahead and remove all of these basting stitches. Now, before we can go ahead and put the lining in, I'm first just whipping these seam allowances to the inside of the hat, just so that there's one less thing to wrangle into place when I start to pin the lining. I'm making sure only to catch that tarlatan layer here so that these stitches don't come through to the outside of the hat, and I won't need to worry about removing them later. As you may remember, we did not go through that cheeky pinning correction process for the lining layer, so there is a bit of excess here, but that doesn't really bother me. The lining is secured into place with a tiny felling stitch and fine matching silk thread. Now to make a tiny covered button to go on the top of the hat. For lack of anything else disc-shaped and appropriately sized, I'm just using a penny as my base. I feel like I've read somewhere that this was done historically, but I can't for the life of me find out where that came from, so don't take my word as documentary evidence for it at the moment. I will put a note in the comments if I do come across such evidence in future. But for now, once I've cut a larger fabric circle, I'm just running a basting thread all around the edges so that I can gather it up easily around the coin. And last but not least, the ends of the ribbon tapes are just quickly finished off with a bit of turning and felling. And thus I proclaim my new funny little hat complete. This was actually a surprisingly quick process. I want to say that this took maybe 2 days in total, but if you aren't unnecessarily slow and fussy like me, you could probably do it in a day. And honestly, I kind of want to make some more, in different colors, because one can never be too blatantly Sherlock trash, right? But in any case, I'm at least now marginally reassured in the knowledge that whatever happens, I at least have the most iconic part of the Sherlock aesthetic ready to go. So with all of that taken care of, I think we should move on to the actual clothing, no? Stay tuned for all that coming soon if you like, and if not, then that's cool too, I guess. Live your life.